Welcome to this week's YouTube lesson on all things feedback. This is one of the most important skills that we all need to master in order to make sure that we learn more, that we help those around us learn more and improve performance. My name is Helen Bryant. I'm the creator of Growth Inc. And in this week's video, we're going to look at why feedback is so important and how to do it well. Feedback is an essential conversation that we need to master at work or at home, anywhere really. It helps us have better relationships and it helps us be more aware and improve our performance. However, it is often avoided. We've all been there where, for example, a colleague is doing a presentation. You've sat through it, you think it's one of the worst presentations you've ever seen. There's too much information on the charts. They're reading the charts. There's so much you could see that they could improve. And yet we just let it go by. Well, even though we could help that person improve their skills, we don't. Now, what's interesting about that, there are probably opportunities where the same thing is true about us. And so inviting feedback and giving feedback helps all of us improve our performance. And it is so needed in our complex and challenging world of work at the moment. So if we're going to solve the problems we need to solve and build the skills we need to thrive in our careers, we just have to embrace feedback. And the second challenge of feedback is it's often just done badly. I remember running a workshop where we'd learned the principles of feedback, and then people had to think about a particular tricky piece of feedback, a difficult conversation that they wanted to have, and then role play it with another person. So they'd tell them the scenario and then they'd go for it. And watching this particular man, as he got going, there was so much coming out of him. It was as though it was hitting the person over the head. He was so forceful. And the woman who was being his role-playing partner was sort of sitting back in a kind of slightly bemused and slightly defensive manner. So the art is, don't do it like that. So we're going to learn some skills that will help you manage those conversations and organize your thoughts so it's so you can give feedback with confidence. The reason why we get so wound up in that way or feel quite anxious with feedback is we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And deep down, it's all connected with that feeling of fight or flight. So we don't want to rock the boat too much. But I think what we have to do is kind of move past that, because on the whole, people you're giving feedback to are people who you work with, who you often have great relationships with. And therefore, it's really thinking through about how feedback can help them and you achieve more together. So having that really positive, proactive and constructive mindset towards feedback can make such a difference. Just recently I read a book on Netflix's culture by Reed Hastings and Erin Meyer called No Rules Rules. They have a whole chapter in that book about saying what you think but with positive intent. So I think if you get into that mindset, I think that's so true. It's really what Kim Scott called in her book of the same name, Radical Candor. It is the confidence to say what you think. Good feedback builds awareness and motivates changes in behaviour. Things that it really needs to be are, firstly, it needs to be specific. So quite often when people give positive feedback, they say, great job, just too vague. It's about being specific, really describing what it is you see. The second thing is to focus on the behaviour and not the person. And this is really a thing to think about in your language. So, for example, if somebody were late for a meeting quite a few times, it isn't that that person is tardy or lazy. It is that that person has been late on a number of occasions. So it's focusing on the behaviour and not on the person. And that use of language can have a massive difference on a person's on how easily people will receive the feedback. The third thing is that it should happen as soon after the event as possible and appropriate. So if somebody's just finished something, you might give them a little bit of time, but quite quickly follow up on what you've seen. If you let time go too far along, it just becomes meaningless because people can't quite remember what happened. So you need to still be in that kind of conscious mindset, thinking about what's happened. And in this increasingly virtual world that we work, I would always recommend that you do feedback face to face. So camera on Zoom, and a conversation. So it can be on the phone, but it's so much more powerful when you can see each other. Never give particularly negative feedback on email or text. It is just not the medium to send those kind of messages. Positive feedback works that way, but it's just so much more meaningful if it's a person-to-person interaction. So the next thing to do to help you is to give yourself a script. Now, there are lots of different feedback models, FBI, SBI, DESK, there's lots of them. I'm going to share with you SBI, Situation, Behaviour, Impact, because I think it is a good way of just explaining how to use it. And it just gives you a framework to navigate the conversation when you're preparing your thoughts. So situation is describing the situation that you are referring to. So the behaviour is the thing that you see that you either want to see more of or that you would like to see done differently. And the impact is the impact of that behaviour. So if it is positive feedback, it tends to be do more of it because of the positive impact it has on what you're doing. And if it is more constructive feedback, it is around something you want to see change and the impact of not changing. So an example might be, we'll go back to the guy who was late for the meetings, and you might be giving that person feedback, and it would sound something like, yesterday you were late for our meeting. This is the third time that you have been late. I need you to be on time and ready to start at the beginning of the meeting. When you don't arrive on time, it is disruptive to the flow of the meeting. Also, it shows a lack of respect to everybody else. Obviously, you might ask questions, but that is the bit when it comes to actually telling the person about what it is that you want to see more of or change, particularly when it is more constructive criticism. It is so important that you are clear what the change is. Now, on everyday feedback, another way of doing it is to use the phrase even better if. So if you you've observed somebody doing something, you might say, this was great. It would be even better if, and be specific about what it is. And that one tip can really help people adopt feedback, because it's not overwhelming to hear one thing or an idea that would make something even better. And it moves feedback into a much more everyday language and more constructive and helpful. So positive feedback is really powerful because what it's saying is, I'd like to see more of this stuff. I really value what you're doing. So remember, don't be too vague. Be really specific about what it is that you want to see more of. Now, positive feedback you can absolutely share in a group. If you're in your team and you want other members of the team to do more of what this person's doing, then this is the time to share positive feedback. It makes people feel great, but it signals to everybody else that this is the kind of behaviours that you would like to see more of or that work better. Now, when it comes to something you would like done better, this is where people get a lot more uncomfortable. And I think there's a great quote: there's only one way to avoid criticism: do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. And Aristotle said that. Now, if you're a manager, this is non-negotiable. This will be a fundamental part of improving your team's performance or your project team's performance. You have to get comfortable giving feedback to improve performance. But actually, I think it's just a great skill for anybody to get used to doing. So even if you're, I think feedback needs to be moved away from the hierarchy, and the more you can make it part of your culture, the easier it is for people to get used to receiving it. Think of it as constructive criticism. So 4 tips here to improve that time when you want to give constructive criticism or feedback. First off, remember your why. So sometimes we kind of shoot into the feedback with perhaps not explaining why something is so important. And the context for feedback is critical. The second is prepare what it is you're going to say. Not the script, but think it through before you go and do it. Don't just launch into it, because the more you get clear in your head what it is you want to say, the more effective you will be. Perhaps thinking about the questions you might ask or how the person will respond. You can just think through how it may work and you'll just be more prepared. So remember to be specific and focus on the behaviours. And finally, just before you start, breathe. And remember to breathe throughout. So sometimes people are a bit taken aback by the feedback they receive. And the more you can breathe deeply and be calm, it will stop that anxiety raising up and you'll be able to control that conversation so much more effectively. Now, in certain organisations, feedback just flourishes and it's normally a cultural thing and it's coming top down, but sometimes that just isn't the case. But we can't sit and wait for our leaders to establish a feedback culture so that we feel comfortable giving feedback and learning from feedback. I think it's easy to start doing simple things that just create a feedback culture around where you work. So, for example, asking for feedback yourself, but also thinking about opportunities when you work with others, so on a project or at the end of a meeting, and just asking the questions, what do you think we've done well? What do you think the things we could do better? What did I do well? What's the thing I could do better? And just start asking those questions. And suddenly you find that the more you do it, the more other people start doing it. Culture really is a thing that grows. So be that person confident enough to keep asking, how are we doing? What could we do to do better? So a great starting place for this is just asking for feedback yourself. So be specific, help the person have the confidence to tell you what they really think. So don't use questions like, how do you think I'm doing? It's just too vague and open. But if you've been working on something, then tell them. For example, I've been working on my presentation skills and I'd really value your input. What do you think I'm doing well? And what would be the one thing you would say to me to do differently that you think would have the biggest impact? So, you can explore that with them, which is great. And also you might say, when they've said that thing, you might say, is there anything else? Because that's a really great question to ask. It's a powerful question because quite often people are too nervous to tell you the thing they're really thinking. But once they've said one and they've seen you receive that feedback, well, they'd probably get more confident to show you perhaps the thing they actually think. So anything else is a really powerful question. But remember, always receive feedback with grace and say thank you. Even if inside you're like, I can't believe they just said that. You have to smile, receive with grace and thank them. And then go away and reflect on it. They may be right, they may be wrong. It's their point of view, but don't disagree. It's their point of view on the question that you have just asked them. So what to do next? First off, download the worksheet. That's just below here on a link. It's a guide just to remind you what I've just shared, but also it's got a worksheet to help you put some of this into action. What I'd encourage you to do is try out those conversations. Ask for feedback, give some positive feedback, and give some constructive criticism in the coming week. So this isn't about finding more time, it's about using the time when you are already working to practice some of those skills. And the more you put it off, the less likely you are to do it. So download that worksheet. Please subscribe to our channel if you found this useful. We will share a weekly lesson. If you ring the bell, you'll get notified for every YouTube we release. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. I will happily answer them. And if there's anything in the future that you would like me to focus on, please let me know. Come join our community of people who want to thrive in their career.